as God willed it, and you saw something of the true visions which the living light has taught me, and you heard them in the embrace of your heart. Now that a part of this writing is finished, still the same light has not left me, but burns in my soul as I have had it since childhood. Therefore I send you now this letter in the true admonition of God. And my soul desires that the light from the light will shine within you and pour over your eyes and awaken your spirit to these writings, so that your soul may be crowned by them as God so wishes. But many wise men of earthly inclination have rejected these things in the inconstancy of their hearts, because they come from this poor female figure who is formed in the rib and locked off by the philosophers. Father of pilgrims, hear the voice of him who is. A strong king sat in his hall, high pillars before him covered in gold veils and adorned with pearls and precious stones. And the king chose to touch a tiny feather, so that it soared up marvelously, and a strong wind bore it up, so that it did not fall. Again he speaks to you, he who is the living light shining in the heavens and in the abyss, not hidden or concealed by listening hearts. And he says, prepare this writing to be received by those who hear me. Make it green with the juice of sweetness. Make it a branching root and a soaring leaf against the devil. Then you will live in eternity. Do not reject these secrets of God, for they are part of that need which is hidden and which has not yet appeared open. May the sweetest fragrance be in you. May you never tire on the path of justice. Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people. Thanks be to God. A reading from the letter of James. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with the bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest instead of waves by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a woven of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast, of bird, of reptile, and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue. A restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more than salt water yield grape. Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people.
Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist," and others, "Elijah," and still others, "one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Well, today we are going to talk about someone you may not be very familiar with. She's not a household name, Hildegard of Bingen. Does it ring a bell? Good. Okay. Yes. She is a medieval mystic. Right? We'll talk a lot more about her because she's really very interesting. But first, I want to start with the gospel. Oops, I'm in the second reading here. Because Jesus seems to be unknown. People are wondering who he is. And he's figured this out. So he asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And he gets all these different answers. Nobody seems to say that he's someone unique. Right? Maybe he's a prophet. And of course he was a prophet. But we believe he was a lot more than a prophet. But maybe he was Elijah or John the Baptist or whoever. So people don't really understand him clearly. And they don't know what he's supposed to be doing. Because once he is now talking to his disciples, he tells them, okay, here's a preview of coming attractions. I'm going to suffer and be tormented, and I'm going to die on the cross, but I'm coming back. And Peter says, "Oh, no, you're not." Which is fairly natural, right? I mean, if someone told us they were going to get, if that was going to happen, would we say, "Oh, gee, I'm sorry"? Well, good luck. No. So he had a pretty natural response, but Jesus was not very happy. Calls him Satan. I think I have to take back what I said last week about Jesus generally being polite to people. This is not a very polite thing to say. But the disciples themselves are confused about who Jesus is and what he's doing. So we have to keep looking, don't we? We have to keep trying. We can read the Bible and it says, oh, Jesus did this and that, and therefore he's our God and Savior, and we say, okay, fine. Now, do I want to go to McDonald's or Wendy's? This is something important, okay? So we need to be reminded. We need to keep thinking about it, and that's why we come here, and that's why we read the Bible, and we listen to other people who have experience and knowledge in this area. So I would say that's who Hildegard was. I am going to get to her in just a minute. But I think one of the things, going back to the disciples, that was a problem is they're watching this man that they think is going to save, whatever exactly that means, and he's saying, no, I'm going to die. And they're shocked. Because we all are going to die. And we all suffer at different points in our lives. It's unfortunately not quite as easy as I would like it to be. But in addition to our life of some suffering and death of the physical body, we are given something to do by God. Jesus says to the crowd, go get your cross and follow me. And the word here for cross is really the post, not the cross being the post. So it can be used to mean a pillar, some kind of support. So he's saying to them, go get something that supports you, which is what God gives us to do. God tells us to go do something important in life. We each have a particular task suited to our temperament, our talents, the place we're in, and that's what we need to do. And it's not always obvious what we're supposed to do, is it? At least many of us have tried many things. So we have prophets who come and talk to us and give us insight. And we get help from God continually. It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop with Jesus. So that brings us finally to Hildegard. Hildegard was German. She lived in a little town of Bingen, which is near the Rhine River. It's a pretty long river, but anyway, she's German. She lived from 1098 to 1179. So she's almost exactly 100 years before the person we talked about last month, which was Clare of Assisi. And they were both nuns, living in an enclosure, meaning they didn't go out much. Okay? But that's really about the only similarity, I would say. And Hildegard was very involved in all of the theology and the things that were going on in her time, even though she was living in this, I said, enclosed place that she wasn't supposed to leave. Abelard and Heloise, I think we know them. They lived at this time. Abelard was arguing with Bernard of Clairvaux. We're going to come back to him. These are big theologians in the time. The Magna Carta was signed in 1215, which is during Clare's life. That was in England, but you can see things are happening. This is not a time where everyone's just kind of sitting around eating vegetables and wondering when they're going to invent TV. It's an exciting time to be alive. Are you familiar with these wonderful poems that were set to music by Karl Orff, Carmen of Burana? Yeah, the music I don't think is 12th century, but the words are. And these were poems written by, I don't know, just people of the time. Some clerics who kind of flunked out, kind of wandering troubadours and things. They're just wonderful. And if you haven't heard the music, Karl Orff was a genius. At least when it came to writing this, it was astonishing. But you get a sense of what it was like to be alive in those days. And there's a lot of, joking about bishops and priests and stuff like that. It's totally irreverent. They're great. So it was, as I said, it was a very interesting time and place to be living. So Hildegard was born in 1098. She was the 10th of 10 children. So the house was pretty full. But she had an unusual quality. She had these visions that she felt came directly from God. And they started when she was 3 years old. So you can imagine a 3-year-old who's telling you that she's talking to God. And here's what God is saying. So anyway, by the time she was 8, I think her parents had had enough. So they sent her to live with this woman who was a recluse in Bingen. And this woman took care of her. And eventually, there ended up being a convent, a small convent of women. And she lived there her entire life after the age of 8. So, and she continued to have visions all of her life. These really overwhelming, psychedelic, incredible visions that came from God. And they just continued to happen in her life. I'm going to describe one of them. There's another one in the first reading of her letter. We'll come back to that. But here's a vision that is very striking because of what it's about. She sees these swirling circles of red and blue and gold, and in the middle of this is the sun shining. And then she sees in these swirls, she sees stars and planets and animals and birds and fish. And then around the edges there are people and angels and heavenly beings, indescribable. And this is a translation of what she wrote. She saw a shining fire, unfathomable, inextinguishable. This fire alive and full of life. I don't think of a fire as being alive, but that's not what she felt. With the flame the color of the air. Now what color is the air? Suddenly the flame glowed white, and then a dark sphere of air appeared. Huge, a shining flame hit this repeatedly. And each time it hit this dark orb of air, a spark flew up, so that soon the circle of air was complete, and heaven and earth shone forth in the fullness of perfection. And I had to be told this. This is her vision of creation. Just pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? I think back to people I knew in the 1960s. They might have had similar visions. And she started writing these things down, and she illustrated them because it was so difficult to convey what she had experienced. So in 1146, she's in her 40s. At this point, she's the abbess of this convent. Again, it's a small convent, no more than 20 people. But she hears a voice, because it wasn't just stuff she saw, but she heard also. And the voice says, "Cry out and write." So she feels she's being told to write this down to share with the outside world. So she writes to Bernard of Clairvaux, whom I mentioned before, who was like the big theologian for Western Europe at that time. And she tells him about what she's doing and says, "What do you think?" And he says, I think you're onto something. Good idea." So then she writes to the Pope, and that's our first reading. She writes to Pope Eugenius III in 1148. Now you notice her technique. She's very smart. She realizes that she is a lowly female in this, godforsaken place, this convent no one's ever heard of. And so she says, "Gentle Father, I am a small and insignificant figure. I am a poor female, formed in the rib and not taught by the philosophers. But God wishes me to tell you what he's told me, so listen." So she butters him up and then says, "Oh, by the way, God is talking to me and told me to talk to you." So she I think of a steel magnolia. That's what I'm looking for. She's a steel magnolia. And she knows how to worm her way in and disarm these guys. And the Pope says, "Wow, you go for it, girl. You are blessed, imprimatur, you may speak." So she becomes this oracle. People came to see her. She was called the Sibyl of the Rhine. People would come to see her to get advice. We have 400 letters that she wrote, maybe more than we've lost. People really wanted to know what she had to say because she had these amazing visions. And somehow people recognized, yep, these came from God. So she wrote a lot from this point on. She has 3 volumes of her visions. She wrote music as well because it was so difficult to communicate the feeling behind these visions. So writing the words down, painting, and composing music. And although I don't think we know exactly what she wrote, the sequence hymn is something that she might have known, the tune, and the words are quite old. Guys, Marcus Aurelius Clemens Prudentius, that's an old guy. And we're getting another one, the communion hymn, right? Yes, the communion hymn, the words are Thomas Aquinas, who is just a bit after her. And the music is an old tune. So she could have known that one as well. And that's the kind of music that she composed. In an effort to communicate what God was telling her to communicate to the world. So all of a sudden, she's a really different kind of person from someone just sitting in a little convent somewhere, right? She's amazing. Do you think she was happy? Well, we don't know. We know very little about her personally. I would suggest that because she was able to be so productive, I would say she probably was happy. Because she wasn't just sitting there feeling sorry for herself. She was also very interested in natural healing and nature and all this stuff, homeopathy, these kinds of things. So she wrote quite a bit about that and about the idea that everything in the universe is interrelated. We're all one, part of one gigantic whatever with God. She sounds like she's from Sedona. But she was talking to God, and she experienced God. And she did two interesting things at the end of her life. One is because she was in such demand, and people were so entranced with her, and found her to be so revivifying, so connected to the source of life. She did 4 preaching tours in Germany. Now, can you imagine a medieval nun going on a preaching tour? No. Anyway, 4 of them. So there she was. And very close to the end of her life, she had moved the convent from where it was originally because the abbot there thought that he was her boss. And as you can tell, she was not going to take that. So she had moved, and at her new place, the bishop in that area decided that a man who had been buried in the cemetery in consecrated ground, actually he'd been excommunicated and then had reconciled himself to the church before he died. And the bishop decided, no, he didn't really reconcile. He's got to be dug up and buried somewhere that's not consecrated. Well, Hildegard didn't buy that. She said, no, I know he was reconciled, so you're not going to dig him up. Now, I don't know whether she went and stood on his grave, but for months, she wouldn't let the bishop have him dug up. And the bishop retaliated by not letting the nuns have communion, not letting them sing, not letting them do anything interesting, and she won. Somehow, there was evidence produced that showed that, yes, this man had been reconciled to the church, so he got to stay there. So she didn't give up easily. This little feeble creature formed from a rib. Okay? So I think Hildegard has 2 things to tell us, besides knowing how to butter people up, which is important. She is a really good example of how we take up our cross, or whatever we want to call it. Because it isn't necessarily a cross that brings pain, it's what we are supposed to be doing in our lives. It's our foundation, it's our support, it's God-given. And that's our job. We all have it, even if we live in a little pokey town in someplace really far away. It doesn't matter. And because of her visions, she knew who Jesus was. The disciples who were living with him had a harder time than she did. She knew because she listened to God. And for us, she is a powerful voice that says, yes, there are still prophets. God sends them to us. We need to be discerning, but we need to listen to them. Because God never leaves us alone. And when God sends us across a job, God also sends the support and the wherewithal to do the job.